Okay, how do we prevent the possibility of getting valley fever? Well, the easiest, as you know, is don't go in these areas. And that really comes down to the next one, which is don't disturb soil unless you absolutely necessarily have to, especially in these areas. So that's the big one. Don't disturb soil. If you do need to disturb the soil, let's say that you are in fact doing a construction project or farming there, it's important to make sure that we wet down the soil to minimize the potential for dust to erupt. So you'll see this a lot where a water truck will go by and water down the path or the route or the construction area that people are working on. So that's a big one. The next is, if you are working in these areas where valley fever is known to be, then you should be involved in a respiratory protection program, which is going to be developed by your agency or organization, and that you should get enrolled in. It's important because even with our dust mask, we need to make sure that we have a fit test, a seal check, and a medical evaluation prior to putting those on. And that medical evaluation is dictated by OSHA. It's a questionnaire. You may have seen it already, but you're going to go ahead and fill those answers or those questions out. Answer them truthfully because it's for your benefit. So if you have smoked, if you do have heart problems or lung problems, answer honestly because, again, the only one that's hurt by this is you, right? If you want to be out there and work and you think you're not going to get to work because you're not going to be able to wear the respirator and you lie about it on your medical form and they go ahead and issue the respirator anyway, the only thing you're doing is putting yourself at greater risk. So just because you have had these issues in the past doesn't mean you can't wear the respirator. What you need to do is answer honestly. If you do answer yes on some of these questions, you're going to be sent over to the doc for a medical evaluation. They're going to run a spirometry test on you to see the capacity of your lungs and your heart to wear these respirators. And that case, the dust masks are very easy. It's the same thing we've kind of been doing with the COVID masks. You usually can withstand that unless you have severe lung issues. So at that point, you'll get fit tested to make sure that the respirator works, and then you'll learn how to do a seal check on those respirators. So that's the big one. If you're working in these areas, make sure you're using the N95 dust mask to filter out those particulates. Remember, valley fever is a microscopic organism. You can't see it with the naked eye, and it is very small. So if you're just wearing a bandana, it's going to slip right through that cloth material. So you need a proper respirator. Those are the big ones. Don't disturb the soil. Wet the soil. Don't work in areas if you don't have to. Make sure you're in the respiratory protection program and minimize your exposure while you're out there. So a lot of times we may be driving around. Instead of driving around with our windows down, enjoying that fresh, soiled air, we should have our windows up. Make sure we're putting the proper filtration filters on our automobile's ventilation system. So a lot of times these come with a nice little in-cabin air filter, and that's fine, but we want that high efficiency in-cabin air filter, so that HEPA air filter, especially if you're working in areas like that. So opt for the next level up, spend that extra few bucks and make sure the air inside your vehicle is nice and clean. This is also the same thing if you pull up to a work site in these areas. Don't leave your windows down because then that dust collects inside your automobile cabin, and guess what? You drive around and you sit down and the little dust cloud comes up, and now you've defeated the purpose. So you want to keep those areas nice and clean. The other thing that we can do, I have on my overalls now, but when I go out to work in these sites, a lot of times I'll put on my coveralls so that I'm covered up and my clothes underneath are not getting contaminated with this dust and soil and fungus. The other thing there is we have to be very mindful of our change room and our street clothes room, our locker room, and our shower area. So we don't want these to cross-contaminate whatsoever. We want to make sure that we have separate entrances there. So come to work in your street clothes, change into your clean work clothes, and then when you leave, derobe your dirty coveralls and things like this. and that should be done in a separate area from your street clothes locker room. At that point, you can then move back and put on your street clothes and then head on out and head home. And those are going to be some of the key ways that we can make sure that we are staying safe around this valley fever. Again, there's a bunch of references here. I'm going to include the maps and some other references, signs, symptomology, and things like that for our for valley fever. I'm getting so confused. We're doing a lot of talking about COVID these days. So the bottom line is, hit that valley fever, check out the resources, make sure that you are staying safe and using these precautionary methods. Know your signs and symptoms. All right, let's move on to our next topic.